Could we see a significant blockbuster deal involving Patrick Kane to the Colorado Avalanche? We'll discuss that potential scenario. Plus, we also have trade rumor updates on the Anaheim Ducks, the Jacob Chychrun situation with the Arizona Coyotes, the New York Islanders, plus a Leafs prospect would like a fresh start and would like to be traded. We have news from the NHL waiver wire, a big signing in Seattle. All that and more coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned to you, today we're coming to you live again from Ottawa, Ontario, as we record here on location away from the normal studio. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. First up, we had news from the NHL waiver wire. Of course, yesterday's video we had out before the waiver claims were processed for the day, so we didn't know the outcome of that. But Andre Schuster, who was on waivers for the Tampa Bay Lightning, has been claimed by the Anaheim Ducks. So he's kind of going coast to coast here. He's going from Tampa all the way over to Anaheim. So that's quite the distance, but at least he'll get to keep his warm weather. Danny DeKeyser with Detroit, on the other hand, has cleared, and the Red Wings have now placed him on injured reserve. So he's obviously going to be out for a little while. Like I mentioned, I wasn't overly shocked that he cleared because of the cap hit he carries. He's a player that I didn't expect to be picked up. He's also on an expiring contract. I'm not really sure he'll get another one beyond this one. It's really kind of difficult to say. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have a big signing in the Seattle Kraken organization. They've signed their top scorer and obviously one of their important first-line players, Jared McCann, who signs a 5-year contract extension at $5 million per season. Based on how he's playing, he's still relatively young. I'm not surprised that they've tried to do this, and to me, this is a pretty good and pretty fair contract. I mean, McCann's a former first-round draft pick who I think it's fair to say probably took a little bit longer than some might have thought to kind of hit his stride and kind of, reach his, or at least what we think might be his peak at the NHL. Certainly he played well during his time in Pittsburgh is kind of where we saw him kind of start to really develop into a more, interesting player that had more higher end potential. And of course in Seattle, he's getting a chance to play even, higher in the lineup again. So that's certainly driving, his point totals up. And he's making the most of it, leading the team in most offensive statistics. So, great signing for him. Like I said, he's young enough that it makes sense to give him the term, give him the money. They have to keep some players. There was some talk around some expiring contracts like him, whether or not they would retain him, or would they try to sell high on a player who's having a phenomenal season. But looks like they'll keep him in the mix, which to me does make a lot of sense here as well. The Columbus Blue Jackets also announced another signing as well, signing Justin Danforth. He gets a 2-year contract extension to remain with the Blue Jackets, and he's at $975,000. As far as I can tell, I believe that is a one-way deal as well. Also some news involving the Kraken as well. Director of Player Personnel Norm McIver appears set to be departing the organization and heading back to his old stomping grounds with the Chicago Blackhawks, where he will be expected to be named a new assistant general manager to Kyle Davidson, who just recently secured the full-time GM spot. Of course, McIver formerly worked with the Blackhawks, but I guess during the Stan Bowman year for the last, at least a few years that he was there, he appeared to be like I guess he was described as not really being part of the inner circle, so to speak, so he wasn't as prominent of a role. So obviously he goes back. Obviously he would have known Davidson, who's been there for some time as well, and will take on an assistant GM type of role. So I'm not sure exactly what his responsibilities will be, but either way, he's a longtime NHL player and executive and could be wealth of experience there. I'm a little bit surprised in a way just that they're bringing anybody back who was, with the organization in the past because of the scandal and everything they were connected to. I mean, not to say that he had any part of it. It's just, sometimes just for, I guess public relations standpoint, just to kind of get a fresh start and bring in fresh people. But he is a well-respected hockey man, and so by no means was he ever connected, at least publicly that I've ever heard, of anything to do with the Kyle Beach situation or anything connected to that. So we'll see where that goes. Loss for Seattle and a gain for Chicago on that front. Now, we've gained a lot of information in the last day or so from TSN Insider Trading, as well as the latest 32 Thoughts podcast, so that's where a majority of today's information tends to come from. The Anaheim Ducks appear to be a team that's going to be incredibly busy and interesting to watch here as we are less now than 2 weeks to the NHL trade deadline. Certainly, there hasn't been any contract negotiations that we can report on through NHL reports for Josh Manson, who's obviously a big right shot defenseman. Not overly offensive, but certainly can play physical, pitching a little bit offensively, and he's been the last 2 years really has had a lot of trade rumors linked to this guy. I think there's a lot of teams that have been interested in acquiring. I know I've heard the Leafs mentioned as a suitor of his numerous times. I don't know if that's still something that they're looking at. Obviously, we got the news yesterday that Jake Muzzin is returning to the ice to skate, and it doesn't look like he's going to be out for the rest of the season now, so that will certainly eliminate some long-term injury reserve funds that they could extend to bring in another contract, so that might make things tougher. Not to say that they won't try, because Manson's cap hit's not huge, and if they can do a money in, money out scenario, that could be something that we can look at. But obviously, yesterday we were talking more about a goalie upgrade, the possibility of swinging a deal with the Hawks for Fleury if he would approve the deal, of course. But we don't know where that's going. But with the Ducks, with Manson, the reason there hasn't been any talks is they've been more focused on trying to sign Hampus Lindholm. They will likely take a run at Manson if they get to the point that they feel that they can't get Lindholm signed. If it gets to that, right now term appears to be the sticking point, is what the latest reports indicate. That they don't really want to go too long term with him, or probably been more comfortable with a 4 to 5 year deal. And certainly the player knows he's going to get longer than that on the open market. And the way defensemen have been paid over the past year, it's been a crazy market for them, and he can certainly bring a decent amount of offense, good puck moving skills, and certainly, arguably would probably be the top defenseman on the rental market should he make the point where he's not signing and is certainly available, has been heavily rumored here over the past number of weeks. So I think they could get a good return for him, but until they reach the point that they've explored everything and they're confident they're not signing Lindholm, then they probably won't take a stab at Manson until that's done. But at least one of these guys is very likely to be traded. I know Pierre LeBrun said that right now the odds are more in favor of Manson being traded than not. So he does have a partial no trade to block a few teams, so that kind of limits things a little bit there. But it'll be interesting to see where things go in that front. But the other guys in Anaheim to keep your eye on as well is Rickard Rakell, who's generating a fair bit of interest. We mentioned him being linked to a team like the Penguins here in the last couple days. Even longtime captain Ryan Getzlaf, I wouldn't be completely shocked. We haven't heard much about him as of right now, but it could come up again. And of course, you got youngster Maxime Comtois, who's having a tough year after being the Ducks' leading scorer last year, is rumored to be available for the right trade. And we had also heard that the Ducks have interest in Bruins winger Jake DeBrusk. Now, having said that, with Comtois being available, could we see a deal there involving those two players? Obviously there's a little bit of an age gap, but not drastically, between the two guys. DeBrusk is slightly older, so it may not necessarily be a one-for-one type of trade, but you have to think with both players kind of wanting a fresh start and rumored to be, not only wanting it, but the team's trying to accommodate, that maybe those two could work something out, especially where the Ducks are reportedly interested in DeBrusk. So we'll see where that goes. I mean, DeBrusk could fit well with that young core that they're building around. A guy like Comtois just kind of started the season. He's had some injuries. He had a COVID situation and just kind of lost a spot. Other young guys come in and kind of been playing so well that I think it just kind of made things tough on him. He's kind of lost his rhythm and, a spot higher in the lineup. And when he has played, he just hasn't been able to get that form just down right, which is tricky to do when you're playing with different line mates, you're playing in a different spot, and you've dealt with all this stuff, and it makes sense why he struggled this year. And I have no doubt that he probably could regain his game and kind of bounce back in a different scenario should he find himself on the move. Now, there's also reports on Jacob Chychrun that there's still lots of interest, but the price tag is obviously what's holding things up, which is no big surprise. There's numerous teams. I think Darren Dreger said on TSN Insider Trading it's believed to be 10 to 12 teams that are in the mix. You could throw the Kings, the Bruins, the Hurricanes, amongst several other teams that are in that mix, including the Ducks as well. And of course, if the Ducks cannot re-sign or choose to trade either Lindholm or Manson or both, they're going to need that replaced. And obviously, Chychrun is a younger version of what actually you kind of almost be a hybrid between the 2D, to be honest. So it would make sense for them to be in on that too. And maybe if they do move Lindholm or Manson, like I said, or both, they could use some of those assets to flip to the Coyotes in order to meet their requirements to get Chychrun out of their organization. So that wouldn't be a complete shocker, but like I said, there's lots of competition, lots of teams, and Dreger feels that very well likely could go right down to the wire on Chychrun, and we may not see a deal right up until the last minute. Now staying with the Coyotes, of course, we saw Phil Kessel extend his Ironman streak another game. Of course, he did play last night, played one shift just to make it official that it counts as a game played. And then you could see him getting some congratulations from the players on the bench where he was taken off, and apparently the team was very accommodating to him and kind of encouraged him to board a flight back. They actually had a charter waiting for him so he could get home because apparently his first child was ready to be entering the world. And so it was, obviously you want to be there for the birth of your first child if possible. And of course he wanted to keep his streak going, so they figured out a way to make it happen. And he's another guy likely will be dealt too. Hard to say, what kind of deal we'll see. There's been rumored for some time he's been available for like a mid-round pick, and there's been no bite. So I'm not sure if he will be dealt, but I would kind of be surprised in a way that if somebody doesn't come along and meet that asking price for all his experience, ahead of the deadline. But at least he knows he's on an expiring contract, get to kind of decide his own future from there. And I know it's been rumored all year, even into last offseason, he's been wanting out of Arizona, so a return there seems highly unlikely. Now, of course, the Shea Weber contract in Montreal got a lot of attention here the past couple days. It's been brought up on the weekend with the 32 Thoughts segment on Hockey Night in Canada, saying that the Habs likely could be looking to trade this contract, which they could get a decent return, and other teams could use it to their advantage, whether it be to hit the cap floor or to extend their LTIR pool to spend above the cap. The Minnesota Wild were a team mentioned on the podcast version of that segment later on the next day on Monday. And obviously it didn't make sense when you heard their rationale around it, but afterwards his blog, Friedman's blog, the 32 Thoughts written version here, came out in the last, not quite a day, about half a day ago now. And after recording that segment and talking to a lot of cap experts, apparently they feel that maybe Minnesota doesn't make the most sense because they obviously would be in LTIR and extend it for a long period of time, which is not great. You're not accruing cap space. It really hinders and limits your flexibility, and as much as the Wild are going to have a tough cap situation to deal with, that it may not be the best solution. So even though it did have some parts of it that made sense to get around their tough cap crunch that they're going to be facing here due to those buyouts on Parise and Suter over the next couple of years, at the same time, this may not be the best way to go according to experts. So they obviously understand the cap more than most of us here, so if that's what they say, we'll see. But I wouldn't completely rule out Bill Guerin trying to be creative around that, but that might not be the best route to take. It seems more likely, based on those comments, that it would go to a team that doesn't really want to have to spend as much to get to the cap floor. The other advantage is not only is it obviously a good sized cap hit to get them to the requirements for the NHL cap floor, but it also has very little cash out. The actual yearly amounts that he's being paid is really small, so it helps them with real money and helps them get to the floor as well. So a team like the Coyotes, who don't have a ton of signings, would not even need to put it on LTIR. That might be a more logical destination, because when you acquire a long-term injury reserve contract like that, you do have to be able to activate and then put it back on, which can complicate things. So that's the other part of why Minnesota might be really, really tough to make that work. So we'll see. Have to look to some teams with some space, and that also might be another reason why that might not happen till the offseason, when teams have a little bit more ability to open things up and be more flexible in that sense. The Islanders are another team that Friedman writes about in his blog here today, talking about Varlamov being available, but not sure to what extent. Obviously, when it comes to Lou Lamoriello, we know he keeps things very close and very little leaks out of that organization. He went on to say in the blog that obviously nobody really wants to admit that they're kind of talking about the Islanders here, or in what sense, because of the respect and the kind of the way Lou looks to do business. But Varlamov is rumored to be available. It was mentioned there where he does have a form of a no trade that apparently he would not waive for the Edmonton Oilers, per James Nichols, who's the Islanders reporter. That's not overly shocking, and like I said, based on what we've heard recently, I'm not completely sure the Oilers are going to be looking for a goalie upgrade anyway, so we'll have to see where that goes. But obviously he'll be picky if he does get asked to waive, but it makes sense that they could move him. He's got another year, $5 million. They get more flexibility to make some changes for next year, which are badly needed, and then at the same time, it lets Sorokin run with the ball here, which he's certainly capable of doing. So we'll see where that goes. As I mentioned as well, there is reports here from Friedman's blog as well, indicating that there is a Leafs prospect who wants a fresh start and wants a trade. There's a lot of talk about Nick Robertson, who's not the guy we're talking about here, but where he was recently called up and given a chance to play, on a high-profile line here in the top 6. There were some, kind of people around the league wondering if are the Leafs kind of showcasing him for an opportunity to be a part of a big trade for their trade deadline plans. Friedman looked into that and basically was told that, the Marlies have tons of scouts all the time. So really, if they want to see Robertson anytime, it's not really that difficult to do, and there's lots of agents and scouts taking it in all the time. So really, he didn't view it that way. It's just an opportunity for the Leafs to kind of evaluate him themselves at that level to see how they feel about things moving forward. So ultimately, that's not the case, but he does go on to mention that there is another Leaf prospect that wants a fresh start, and that's defenseman Joseph Dusax, who's on a point per game total right now, 37 points in 37 games in the AHL this year. He's 24 years old, came out of college, signed as a free agent with the Leafs back in 2019, is completing his entry-level contract. He's spent a little bit of time in the East Coast League early on, but it's been 3 straight years at the AHL level, getting better and better each year, except this year he's up to a point per game total with really no clear path to the NHL with the Maple Leafs. He probably feels like time and opportunity is running out in that organization, so he apparently would like a fresh start. So it would not be shocking with those kind of totals. In fact, he's a little bit more mature and could probably jump into the NHL faster than some prospects, especially ones that were more recently drafted. Wouldn't be shocking to see the Leafs include him in any kind of deadline deals that they do to bolster their lineup, because we know they're going to be doing something. They pretty well have to. I think, as most teams, it's going to become a bit of an arms race heading into the last little stretch here towards the deadline. And lastly, could we see a significant deal with Patrick Kane to the Avalanche? I know Dave Pagnotta recently dropped, a little bit of a bomb, in my opinion, saying that recently that the Avalanche are very interested and apparently have put in some contacts and some early feelers to the Blackhawks that if once they announced that they're going through a rebuild after Davidson did his media availability after being named full-time GM, he made it clear that it was going to be a full rebuild. He didn't want to put a timetable on it. We heard talk of 3 years, 5 years, but he kind of said he really couldn't put a definitive timetable on it, which makes a lot of sense. So with that being said, it's automatically started a lot of chatter. We talked about it here on the channel back a number of days ago, saying could guys like Taves, Kane, Kubalik, Strome, etc., all Fleury, all find their way out the door, because a lot of them doesn't really make sense to remain with the organization if that's the path they're going down. Now it's believed that the Hawks have had time to talk with their leaders like Taves and Kane. Kane made some comments about it, saying it's kind of neat in a way to play your whole career with one team, but kind of left it open. He obviously made it sound like he was more interested in staying, which is what you expect him to say. I don't expect him to come out and be like, oh yeah, if the team's going to rebuild, I want out. He's not going to do that publicly. So that's the tricky part here, is that the fact that him and Taves have full control with a no move. So they're not going to go anywhere and be going to a team that they don't want to go to. They also make over $10 million a year, which makes it really hard for teams to make that work. So in a Kane trade, obviously he'd demand a big return. The Hawks would get a good haul, which would be helpful with their rebuild. If they can talk him into that, then why not, right? I mean, he's still playing at a real high level, way higher than Taves. Numerous Stanley Cups, numerous awards to his career, one of the greatest American-born players of all time. And certainly, if he would go to the Avalanche, that would be an insane top 6, really, if you think about it. To add him into the mix with guys like McKinnon and Landeskog and Rantanen and the way Kadri's been playing, Burakovsky, etc., that would be a pretty stacked lineup. I mean, he'd end up probably playing on that second line, and it would be ridiculous. The Avalanche do have other areas that they could look to, but that $10.5 million, they do have some space at the deadline to add, but they're nowhere near $10 million. So they'd either have to have a third-party team eat the salary to chomp it down. The Hawks will have to retain as well. And then, of course, they might have to have some money go out. It kind of depends on how that all works out. But if the Hawks would retain, obviously if they can retain up to 50%, then the other team, that the third party, could retain another 50. They can get that down to 2.5 or whatever, or be a little bit more than that, be 2.75 or something in that range. But still, that would be tremendous. They could make that work. It would cost a lot of assets, but as I mentioned before, the Avalanche are a team that's going to want to go for it this year. They know that it's going to be tough. They see an opportunity in the Western Conference, I think, to make it to the Stanley Cup final, and I think Joe Sakic is going to be very aggressive to get get something significant done. Now, another reason, like I mentioned before, about a guy could also be a big part of this team in Colorado, like JT Miller, that the Kane contract does the same thing. And he's got this year and one more, right? So obviously next year they'd have to make sure they can make it work. So that's why I think having a third-party broker would be like super important. But at the same time, like Miller, the contract expires before the new contract for McKinnon would have to kick in, so they don't have to worry about long term, because that's going to be the next mega deal for the Avs, so they can get that done. Make it work here between this year and next year where they're going for Stanley Cups. They have lots of prospects that are very intriguing. I don't really think they want to trade a guy like Alex Newhook, but they might have to for a guy like Kane. They have obviously like defenseman Justin Barron. There are numerous other prospects as well, and maybe it's been rumored as well a player like JT Compher might be available as well if they're going to move anybody off the roster and kind of to make the money work, so to speak, for cap purposes. So I wouldn't rule out the chances of this happening. It's very intriguing to think. I do think obviously the odds of it happening are slimmer than a lot of trades because we don't really know how Kane would feel about that. But if Kane would want to, this could be an absolutely blockbuster deal and give him a chance to go on to continue to add to his legacy with another Stanley Cup. I would think that if he did want to agree to a move, that this would probably be one of the few teams that he would do it. And to me, Kane would make a lot more sense than Claude Giroux. And we'll see what happens. I know the way the Avs have played recently, there's, again, talk about goaltending. I don't know that they're going to do that. I guess we'll see where it goes. But at the end of the day, Kane trade to the Avalanche is an extremely interesting thought to think about. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. This channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.